The Ruby-Throated Hummingbird by Florence Merriam. Coffee Break Collection 37. More Birds. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Did you ever see a hummingbird sitting on the bare branch of a towering tree? Until you have, you will scarcely appreciate what a wee mite of a bird it is. Indeed, I find it hard to think of it as a bird at all. It seems more like a fairy, a glittering fragment of a rainbow, as Audubon calls it, or as someone else has said, like a gem or blossom on pinions. Something too dainty and airy to have even 3 inches of actual length. It seems like the winged spirit of color as it comes humming through the air to hover on the flowers on the piazza, its body like green beryl, and its throat glancing fire. Like Puck, it might boast that it could put a girdle round about the earth in 40 minutes, for while we are wondering at its friendliness, it darts off and is gone like a flash of a diamond. In this vicinity, the garden of Mrs. Bragg seems to be one of the favorite haunts of the hummingbirds, and she has kindly given me some notes on her experiences with them. She says, "In confinement, they do not appear to pine for freedom, beating themselves against the wires like other birds, but seem contented and at home. From the first, I kept a pair caged a whole summer, feeding them with water sweetened with honey or sugar. When I put a cup of their food in the cage, they would alight on my fingers, and with their long flexible tongues suck off the honey I had accidentally spilled. In disposition, they are too pugnacious to live as harmoniously as one would expect or desire, sometimes pursuing one another around the cage with great ferocity and such inconceivable rapidity that their tiny forms seemed resolved into absolute sound. I frequently permitted them to fly about the room for exercise, but they never returned voluntarily to their cage. When caught, they did not resist and struggle, but saw the door in their prison house closed upon them without a complaint. They never had a sick or unhappy day the whole summer, but when the cold days of autumn approached, they began to droop, although their cage was hung in the warmest place in the room. For 3 days they hung suspended to their perches by their feet and did not relax the hold while life lasted. I have found them clinging to vines and shrubbery in that manner on cold mornings after a frost, but though seemingly lifeless, the warmth of the hand would revive them. Some years a few are unaccountably tardy about migrating, and other times they make the mistake of coming too early in spring. Undoubtedly, most of them migrate in August, but with them, as in every other community, there are always some laggards as well as bold pioneers. I once found one in my house on a very cold morning in fall. He was probably on some house plants that had been brought in from the frost the previous night, and was too benumbed with cold to know it. I caught and fed him, as it would have been barbarous to turn him out into the cold. He soon became a great pet, and was tame as a kitten. One day 2 gentlemen entered the room where his cage was hanging, both wearing tall hats. He fell immediately to the bottom of his cage, with wings outspread, eyes closed, body rigid, and with every appearance of death. We took him in our hands and warmed him by the fire. He remained motionless. We decided that those hats had frightened him to death. With a heavy heart I laid him aside, intending to embalm him at my leisure. A few minutes later my friends left the house. Directly after the door closed I heard humming and buzzing in the room. Looking up, there was a bird circling around the room in the most hilarious manner. Who can tell whether his apparent death was not counterfeited? If it was not feigned, why did he revive the moment the door was closed and I was alone? If you capture one out of doors and hold him in your hand, he will practice the same ruse, stretching himself out, stiff and motionless. Thrown off your guard, you stoop to examine your prize when, lo, your hand is empty, and your bird is nearly out of sight before you have time to recover from the astonishment. Towards the humble bee, he manifests the utmost ill will, veritable dog in the manger spirit, driving him away from one flower after another, till the bee in pure desperation turns on his persecutor. There are surely sweets enough for all, and he knows it. Still, it may be possible that his animosity is aroused more by a personal aversion he has to the bee than by more selfish considerations. We give him the benefit of the doubt. He is fond of silence, and will often sit half an hour together on a dead twig, wrapped in the profoundest meditation. Doubtless, incessant droning of the bees disturbs his reflections and irritates him beyond endurance. I once had in my garden a ribbon bed of white and rose-colored lemon. Its unsullied beauty was like that of a dream of poetry. Every flower was perfect, with an unsurpassed and delicate loveliness. One sunny morning I observed an unusual number of hummingbirds and bees working among the blossoms. Presently there was a commotion. The hummingbirds had united to drive the bees away, darting at them furiously, uttering at the same time their spiteful piping cries. The bees, intent on seeking their breakfast, at first gave up good-naturedly and flew to some other flower, only to be driven from that a moment later. At length forbearance ceased to be a virtue, and the temper of the apathetic bee was aroused. A fierce battle ensued. They pursued one another round and around that flower bed, over and under and through the flowers, sometimes the birds and then the bees having the vantage. Their rage knew no bounds, and they fought till sheer exhaustion compelled them to desist. Every flower was torn to shreds, not a whole blossom remaining. The nest of the hummingbirds is as delicate as the little creature itself. It is built in the form of a small cup, saddled on a horizontal limb, and covered on the outside with lichens, which make it look like a knob on the branch. The child who discovers a hummingbird's nest is credited with sharp eyes. End of Ruby-Throated Hummingbird by Florence Merriam.